All for today's week, Chapter 8, Foreign Policy. For this course outline, we shall look into the first introduction, followed by the definition and also the approach of foreign policy. Next, we have instrument of foreign policy, and last but not least, we shall look into Malaysian foreign policy. So, for the introductions, one of the wheels which the process of the international politics operates. So, foreign policy is not separate from the national policy. Instead, foreign policy is a part of it. So, foreign policy consists of national interests that are to be furthered in relation to other states. So, almost all the states determine the course of their foreign policies within the limits of their own state strengths and also the realities of the external environment. So the non-political relations also fall in the scope of foreign policy. So according to George Modelsky, he defined foreign policy as the system of activities that evolve by the community ataupun a group of people for changing the behaviour of other states and for adjusting their own activities to the international environment. Moving on, according to Paddleford and Linkert, foreign policy is the key element in the process by which a state translate its broadly conceived goals and also interests into a concrete course of action in order to attain this objective and pressure its interests. And last but not least, according to C.C. Rodi, he stated that foreign policy involved in the formulation and also implementation of a group of principle which shape the behavior pattern of a state while negotiating or contacting with other states in order to protect or further its vital interests. So there are three approach of foreign policy. So seek to explain foreign policy behavior as the output of the subnational organisation, followed standard operating procedure or engaging in a problem-solving search. So for foreign policy, it's more on decision-making approach. So there are three levels of analysis on decision-making. The first one we have system level, which is the interaction of states and also non-states actors at international level that can affect and also due to conflict and cooperation. So for example, like the United Nations plays a vital role in the Arab-Israeli conflict. So moving on, we shall look into the state level. So in this level, how states make decisions, for example, like economic power, military power, and also domestic factor. And the last levels of decision making in the individual level. It refers to the human characteristics. For example, like perceptions of the people, the knowledge, the image of the country, and also in the psychological factors. So no single level by itself can provide a complete explanation of events and changes in the world politics. So each level organize the fact in its own particular trend, and each level focus on different facts. So there are a few instruments of foreign policy. Number one is diplomacy. So diplomacy is a way of dealing with other nations to compromise and communication. So it requires different governments and leaders to meet and discuss on various issues. Diplomacy also is a form of peacemaking without the externalities that war brings out. Number two, the foreign policy instrument is alliance. So it is agreement between two or more actors of foreign policy to cooperate on issues of common interest. So there are four types of alliance. Open, which is public known. Covert is maintained secret. Formal, when creating bodies to support and manage them. And last but not least is informal, when there is no structures are created. Moving on, we shall look into the instrument in terms of economic. We have number one, we have foreign aid. It refers to the voluntary and also intentional transfer of resources from one state as a donor to another state as a recipient. For example, we have humanitarian aid, development aid, and also military aid. Number two, foreign economic and also trade policy is a part of foreign policy instrument. So trade is defined as the exchange of goods and services between foreign policy actors. So these are the most relevant instruments. For example, we have European Union, we have World Trade Organizations, that these are the creations of trade blocs. It can be said that coercive measure intended by an actor of foreign policy to cause the economic damage to one another. So the tools that has been used is embargoes, boycotts, freezing of funds and assets. So this is known as economic sanction. So example like European Union imposed sanction on Iran, Syria and Ivory Coast. Next, the tool of foreign policy in terms of military pressure, number one is warfare. So, warfare is intended to achieve the foreign policy objective by the coercion ataupun kata-kata by the pressure of other foreign policy actors achieved by use of military force upon them. So, it entails an enormous amount of risk and also cost, because when we talk about war, it involves not just money but the life of the people. So the risk, it will include the possibility of military defeat and lack of public support for the war. So let's say if one country or if a state lost in the war, so the people will be suffered. So there are three types of war. Number one is conventional war, which is it is the open warfare with the use of conventional weapons. Number two, unconventional war. It is the covert warfare or with the use of non-conventional weapons. And last but not least is asymmetric war, where the parties in conflict differ greatly in their military capabilities. For introduction, based on the principle of neutrality and maintaining peaceful relations with all countries, it is important for one state actor continue to respect the internal affairs of other nations. Therefore, by advocating a policy of non-interference, recognizing the sovereignty of nations. So since independence until today, Malaysia has, number one, uphold the country's sovereignty. Number two, promote the universal peace. Number three, Malaysia fostering friendly relations with other foreign countries. And last but not least, protecting Malaysia's interests in the regional and international arena. So for example, we have ASEAN as a part of our regional interest organisation. The function of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is to pursue the nation's foreign policy in accordance with Federal Constitution. So the main objective of foreign affairs is to protecting and promoting the nation's interests at the international level. So how? First, it has established a total of 105 missions in 83 countries, and for Ministry of Foreign Affairs appointed 53 honorary consul who provide support and also assistance in promoting Malaysia's interests in abroad. So these are the timeline of changes in Malaysia's foreign policy. In today's world, Malaysia become the voice of the developing countries and a role model for many developing countries. Malaysia also have an active stance at the United Nations and other international conferences. For example, like Malaysia have the peacekeeping missions under the United Nations itself. In ASEAN, the formulation and adoption of the ASEAN Charter itself has been ratified by all the ASEAN member states and come into force on the 15th December 2008.